Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. When somebody clicks the little record icon here in our app bar, we want to take them to a new page where we can allow them to record a custom sound. Let's go ahead and stop. I shouldn't have clicked that. And to do this, we need to create a second page in our app and then navigate from the main page.xaml to this new page that we're going to add. So navigation in Windows Phone apps is similar to navigating from one web page to another. And in this lesson, we're going to learn about the Navigation API. And even though our needs are simple, in this particular app, we'll find out that the Navigation API is capable of doing some pretty interesting things with regards to how the Windows Phone 8 operating system will rehydrate apps that were shut down due to memory constraints and rehydrate the previous page that the user was on. So our game plan in this lesson is pretty simple. First of all, we're going to revisit that data-bound project template that we created a little sample of just so we could see whether we wanted to use it or the Pivot app template for our SoundBoard app. And what I want to do is take a look at how it navigated from the main page to the details page, just so we can learn how it works. And then we're going to discuss the classes that are required for navigation in the Windows Phone 8 API. And then finally, we're going to come back to our SoundBoard project and we're going to implement the code that's necessary to navigate from our main page to a new page that we'll use and we'll set up in the next and subsequent lessons to actually record a custom sound. So if you remember from a couple of lessons ago, we looked at the data-bound project app template. So what I want to do is actually load a second version of Visual Studio and then load up, let's see, I think it was this one right here, this data-bound app 1. Okay, and if you'll recall, let's go ahead and run the app again. What we were able to do was click on one of these list items in order to see a detail page with the name of the item and its lorem ipsum text, right? And then you can navigate back using the back button. All right, so what I want to do is, go ahead, let's stop this now and take a look at the Solution Explorer. And in addition to the main page.xaml where we spent most of our time, there's also this details page.xaml. It's a second .xaml page in the app. You can see the layout's completely different, the controls are different, and we can look at how it implements this. Basically, the content panel has a single text block that's bound to this line 3 property of the in the view models. You recall it. The load data will add new instances of the item view model, and so we have this line 3 property that we never really looked at or thought about much, but that's what's actually being displayed in the details page.xaml. Now what we're most interested in here is how is it that we're able to navigate from this main page.xaml by selecting one of the items and then go to the details page that actually displays the information about the extra property, the line 3 property of the selected item. And so what we want to do is start on our main page.xaml, and let's focus on, let's take a look at this selection changed main long list selector underscore selection changed property. So let's right click it and select navigate to event handler. And here you can see the code that's required to actually navigate to the details page.xaml. All right. So first of all, what we do is we use this navigation service object, and we merely call its navigation method in order to navigate. However, it has a larger role for more complex scenarios. Since it is solely responsible for navigation between XAML pages, it also allows you to inspect the navigation history, which is called the backstack. And it'll even allow you to remove entries from the backstack and then observe the effect that these changes have on the navigation through the app. So to learn about some of the advanced functionality of the navigation service class, you definitely want to check out this article on MSDN. It's called How to Navigate Using the Backstack for a Windows Phone. However, in our case, we merely need to navigate from the main page.xaml to a new page. We don't need to worry about alternate back page scenarios like skipping pages or adding additional pages to the backstack as the user clicks the back button on their physical phone's interface. We don't need to worry about alternate back page scenarios, passing values between pages, or the like. Therefore, this other article on MSDN describes the process that we're going to use, at least in general terms, in case you want to do a little bit of additional research. It's how to perform page navigation on the Windows Phone. Most of the simple navigation scenarios are accomplished using the navigate method that you read about on that page and that we see here used on this example in the main page.xaml.cs. Now notice that navigate uses a URI object. And a URI object represents a uniform resource indicator. It's similar to a URL, but it has a little bit more utility and is more far-reaching than just a URL. But at any rate, a URI has two basic parts. It has a string representation that represents some location, and then it has this URI kind, go all the way over here to the end, this URI kind that indicates how you should interpret that first part, the location string, all right? So let's start by parsing through that string. You'll notice that part of this string, it's actually constructed, but the first part of it is just basically a literal string, and then there's another part of it that is dynamic. And it retrieves its values from the currently selected item, and it concatenates the static and the dynamic portions with the plus operator, okay? So the first part, the literal string part here on the left-hand side, should be obvious. It's the XAML page that we want to navigate to, in this case the details page.xaml, this file here in our Solution Explorer. Now everything after that, after this question mark and so on, is what's called a query string. And you've undoubtedly seen a query string before, even if you didn't know what it was called. A query string is a means of sending additional information along with the intended page to be loaded. I said that you've undoubtedly seen this before because it's one of 2 or 3 primary ways of sending additional data between stateless web pages, and it's used ubiquitously on the World Wide Web. So for example, if we were to open up Internet Explorer, and in Bing, if we were to search for Clint Rutkas here, you will see, if I pull over the location bar here, that there is a number of information that's appended onto the end of the page that we're looking at, the search page. There's this Q equals Clint plus Rutkas, and then a QS equals HS, and a form equals QBLH. And some of these things we simply don't understand because they're used programmatically on the back end by Bing.com. However, it's basically just a clever way of passing information from this page to this page, okay? And it's intended to be interpreted and processed by another web page or by the software that is running Bing.com in this particular example. So in the code example that we're examining, when somebody taps on an item in the long list selector, we want to send the ID, the identifier for the item that was selected from the main page.xaml to the details page.xaml. And so the question mark separates the page name from the query string portion of the URL. And the query string is in the form of a name-value pair. So here is the name of the query string that we want to send. It's called selected item, and then there's an equal sign, and that will separate the name from the value that we're passing. So for example, selected item equals And this might turn out to be 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the item was that was clicked on in the phone's user interface. So the selected item is the name of the pair, and everything after that equals character is the value of the pair. It's probably like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in this particular example. So if you were to have more than one piece of information to send, like we saw a moment ago on Bing.com, it actually appended a bunch of additional information to the query string. You use a ampersand character. So take a look at this quick example on screen. We'll see this used later in the series to send geopositional latitude and longitude from one page to another. It'll look something like this, where the query string will be latitude equals 41.8 whatever, ampersand longitude equals 87.623, so on. Okay, this is how you're able to pass multiple values in one string using name value pairs separated by ampersand characters. It's pretty clever. So again, that represents the location, and then what comes after that is an enumeration called Uri Kind. And there's 3 possible values that could be used here: Uri Kind.relative, Uri Kind.absolute, or Uri Kind.relative or absolute. So with regard to the differences between these first 2 options, take a look at this page on MSDN. It says the following: absolute URIs are characterized by a complete reference to the resource, for example, contoso.com/index.html, while a relative URI depends on a previously defined base URI, so for example, /index.html. So in our case, a relative URI would be relative to the project structure. So when we prefix the URI string with a / character, we're specifying the root of the project's deployment package. That should correspond with what we see in the Solution Explorer. In this case, the details page .xaml is in the root of the project's folder. Okay, and so when this project is deployed, those 2 XAML files, detailspage.xaml and mainpage.xaml, will both be in the root of the package, like we saw when we opened up the petsounds.zap as a zip file way back, I believe, in lesson number 8. You remember that? So what about the third option here, Uri Kind.relative or absolute? Well, it's a bit trickier. The best that I can figure out by looking at MSDN is that we're simply asking the runtime, the phone's runtime engine, to figure it out for itself. It'll attempt to clean up the URI string that we provide and figure out where the resources we're referencing actually are located. So I think we could switch that to Uri Kind.relative and it would work too. All right, but we'll leave it the way that Clint originally built it. So once the navigation service loads the new page, the details page.xaml, an event called onNavigated2 fires. So let's take a look at that. This onNavigated2 event will fire on the new page that's been navigated to. Now we've already seen this in our app in the mainpage.xaml.cs file whenever we were binding data, right? We looked at this onNavigated2 method, and I didn't really talk about it a lot at that time. But notice the code here. The navigation context object has a query string object, and it has a try_get_value method. And we send in the name of the name value pair that we're trying to retrieve, and it will give us back in the out parameter, if it's successful, the selected index, so the value of the name value pair. Okay, so that's how we send data to the next page by using a query string like so, and then this is how we grab the data out of the query string like this, and that will give us the value that was passed in. That'll allow us to determine which of the list items here were selected by the end user. So now that we've seen a full-fledged navigation example at work, we're better prepared to tackle this in our own project. So let's go ahead and shut this down and get back into our SoundBoard app. Let's go ahead and first of all start by creating the new page that we want to navigate to. And so I'm going to call that recordaudio.xaml. So I'm going to right-click, select Add, New Item. I'm going to make sure to add a Windows Phone portrait page, and I'm going to call this recordaudio.xaml and click Add. Before we jump here, back in the main page.xaml, we want to revisit the event handler method stub that we created several methods ago called the record audio click. Actually, we want to look at that in the main page.xaml.cs right here. Okay, so this is the event handler for the record button on our app bar. And what we want to do is I want to replace that exception with the following line of code. Navigation service dot navigate, and we're going to pass in a new URI, and that new URI will have two parts. So we're going to choose this overloaded version. It'll have the name of the page, so in our case recordaudio.xaml, and then Uri Kind dot relative or absolute, right? All right, so hopefully this version will be dramatically simplified when compared to that hairy example that we saw a little bit earlier in the data-bound app template. When we create a new URI object with a simple address to our recordaudio.xaml page, and then we use the Uri Kind dot relative or absolute enum value. So let's test that and just see if it works. Let's go ahead and run the app. Okay, so let's go ahead and click the little record button, and you can see we navigate to our new page that we just added to the project. That's awesome. What we'll see when we tackle a whole other project is how we'll expand on this to actually pass data like the latitude, longitude that I referenced a little bit earlier in this lesson in order to pass data between two pages. But we'll come back to that much later in this series. All right, so to recap, the big takeaway from this lesson was how to navigate between XAML pages using the navigation service. We learned what a URI object is and how to specify a page location and even pass parameters between pages. And we also looked at what the Uri Kind enumeration options mean and so on. All right, so we're getting closer to actually now fleshing out the functionality of recording a sound on this new page. We'll start that process in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you.